Hydrogen Skills Task Force webinars, and it's the webinar to launch one of our first deliverables, the database of job roles and skills, and our skills guidance, skills needs assessment guidance document. We've put the program up there so that you've got a bit of a sense of what's coming your way. About half the session will be spent on giving you context to the work and presenting the deliverables at a high level. And about the other half, or just slightly less, will be devoted to having a panel discussion with a set of eminent panel discussions across the globe, just to share some thoughts and some tips and tricks and some insights on skills needs assessments and workforce estimations. You'll see some notes. Please feel free. We are not going to take questions at the end of each section. We're going to handle questions right at the end. So there is a space where you can list your questions. We are a large number of attendees, so we might not get to everyone's questions. We can try and answer some of those just in the text. But then we'll take a series of questions towards the end. And yes, you've got the chat space, you've got the Q&A, and it's normal rules apply. We hope to have as engaging and as constructive a session with you as we can. So without further ado, I'd like to ask the Executive Director of the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy to formally welcome you and open our webinar. Over to you, Laurent.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. And also warm welcome to all the people attending today's webinar. So my name is Laurent Tonnet. I'm the Executive Director of the IPHE. So what is the IPHE? Is an International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cell in the Economy. In fact, it's a government-to-government partnership to develop a hydrogen economy. And so it's really, I would say, the unique platform where, as you can see here, 26 countries and the European Commission from all over the world are discussing at governmental level, how can we collaborate and make sure that a hydrogen economy will happen as soon as possible for the sake of our climate. Today, we have Brazil as IPHE chair, with as vice chair, the Netherlands, Japan, and the US. So IPHE has been created 22 years ago, and since 22 years, we have these exchanges with more and more new countries joining us. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, so IPHE, one of the priorities is, of course, to exchange among governments about the latest news, strategies, policies, demonstrations, but it's also to share, in particular regarding skills development, which is the main topic for today. And just I want to mention that we have, for instance, an early career network. And this network is just gathering today more than 500 members from more than 40 countries, even outside IPHE countries, with young people less than 35 years old, just as a network exchanging about their opportunities, their experiences, just to create this hydrogen, I would say, community to work and to exchange all together. On the other hand, of course, when we are developing a hydrogen economy, we also have to ensure that there is some local benefits. And this, you will listen until the end of the year and COP30, that this is more and more also a priority when developing hydrogen. This clean hydrogen needs also to demonstrate that there are some local benefits. And for that reason, we've launched now 2 years ago, this DIA platform, which is for diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. And in this platform, we were pleased to launch a mentor-mentee platform earlier this year in Rotterdam during the World Hydrogen Summit. And you see the link for free registration to become either a mentor or a mentee, and then to have this B2B platform just to have this kind of training exchanges between mentors and mentees. So I can just encourage you to go either to register for the Early Career Network or for the DIA platform. Next slide, please. And then what are we doing concretely also within the IPHE is really to provide inputs for developing this hydrogen economy. And to do so, we have, as you can see here, 2 working groups, 5 task forces on different topics, where experts coming from either governments or experts from public research or national agencies are working together in order to address transversal and non-technological issues with a global perimeter and just listing some about regulation, code and safety, education, environmental impact assessment, certification schemes, trade rules, and permitting, and also civil storage and maritime. And one of these task forces is skills. And that's why now we are so happy that today we can really launch and provide all, I would say, the outcomes of this work within this skills task force on this database tool where it compiles and summarizes job roles, skills needs, identified intelligence-related assessments from around the globe. And we hope that after this webinar, you will look and use this tool, and of course, any feedback will be more than welcome. So again, thank you very much for joining today. And then, Lauren, I give you back the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurent. So a little bit more on the Skills Task Force. Laurent has given you some context. There are a number of task forces, and they get convened for a period with particular goals. And ours has been the Skills Task Force. Next slide, Christina. So what we realized early on is that if you look across our membership as IPHE, we have some countries with very well advanced hydrogen economies, some that are really just starting out. And as Laurent pointed out, one of our core functions within the IPHE is knowledge sharing, learning from each other in a very collaborative way. So the first thing we thought we would do as a skills task force is almost to take stock of what are we doing as countries in the skills and workforce development space, and what can we learn from each other? And we thought one of the things that could be helpful, because there's a lot of people trying to grapple with what exactly are the skills we need for the hydrogen economy. Are we going to need new occupations? Are we going to, has everybody got to be like an expert in this? And really, there are countries that have walked this path already, and there are others still on starting that journey. So the tools we've developed is really very much at this stage knowledge sharing tools, enabling us to learn from each other within the partnership, but also to then enable the wider people who are not necessarily part of the partnership to also benefit from these outputs. In the longer term, given the nature of the IPHE, we are looking for opportunities, maybe to coordinate amongst countries, maybe to have some form of standardization of particular skills so that we can promote particularly standardization and safety internationally, but also mobility of workforces and economies of effort through working together. So short-term goals are very output-driven. Longer-term ones are really to use this discussion to start finding the commonalities and the opportunities for collaboration. Next slide, Christina, please. So who are we at this stage? We're a voluntary group consisting of members of the IPHE. The task force is currently led by Franklin Chang-Diaz, who you'll meet a little bit of later on the panel, and myself on behalf of the South African Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. You've met Laurent at the secretariat level and Michael, who's the project officer. They support us as a task force. Our membership is, and you will, across the course of this webinar, you will meet some of our members today. As I'll point out, we'll have future webinars where you'll get to meet some of the other members. But we currently have membership from Brazil, Canada, the EU, South Africa, the US, and Uruguay. Those are our core members that are doing the work to produce the outputs and sharing knowledge kind of as the core team. But we're also joined on occasion by our colleagues from Germany and from the UK, who at this stage are acting as observers and sharing knowledge. So they very much also complement our efforts. So you can see it's quite a large team with different countries represented, and a fairly good mix then of countries who have well-developed hydrogen economies, and some like our South Africa and some of the others that are just starting out. We're also supported by a team that you'll meet today. They're not formally listed as members, but be sure that they are doing a lot of the work in the background to help us to deliver our outputs. Next slide, Christina. Great, so as our first set of task force outputs, we set out to develop this database of job roles and skills. And that really set out to say, well, actually, different countries are identifying different, job roles for hydrogen. Yes, those will be matched to their particular economies, but let us see if we can learn from each other. Do we think the same about a particular role and the particular skills? Or do we think differently? And then how do we start that conversation so that we can actually benefit from each other's efforts and streamline our efforts? That is one of the deliverables we're launching today. It's already available on the IPHE website, and we've put the links to that in the chat as well. What we set out to do at the start is to think, what are all the bits of pieces of information that people might want to know about skills? And once we brainstormed that, we actually had a very vast list of things. And we did a survey amongst our membership and gathered information on what they are doing in practice. And we found in the end that we had so much to say that we've split our guidance up into 3 publications. And even then, the first one is quite long. So you're going to bear with us that we might be leaving you with quite a long bedtime reading to do. But today we're launching the first of those publications, and it's the methodological publication. I'll leave it to my colleague Nyawa to tell you a little bit more about the whys and the hows of that. And that's also launched today. In about a month's time, we'll be launching our second publication, which has a focus on training and dissemination. And there are some wonderful case studies in that from right across the world, which we really hope that you will find inspirational for your own efforts, and where you can learn and possibly collaborate around training and dissemination of information on training. And then our final deliverable is really taking it from a theoretical point of view, from what people are doing already in practice, and saying, how do we scale this? How do we really push this into developing the workforces at the scale that we need to? And then how do we bring in elements of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access? Where do we find a role for unskilled workers? And significantly as well, how do we use this knowledge that we have about skills to assist in transitions where there might be people either transitioning to this fast-growing industry or having to transition out of another industry that might not be growing as fast. I think what I'd like you to appreciate is that for us at the moment, this is really a collation of information. We're in the next and future phases of the task force, we can get more analytical, but also there might be a vast number of things out there that you are aware of as attendees that you could help us showcase. So it really is an open invitation to you where there are examples that you think can be featured, that can be shared. We would really welcome it if you would share that to us through the IPHE, and the links for how you can contact us are on that database sheet. So it's really an invitation to a conversation, an invitation to continue to contribute to these efforts, because these documents will not be static. As new examples come in, as new case studies are done that identify job roles and skills, we're in position to keep building these library of tools, either from our own efforts and collectively with you, to really create a resource that, as Laurent said, is going to help us to grow the hydrogen economy as quickly as possible. So that is my broad introduction to the task force. I'm now going to hand over to one of our task force colleagues, Nyawasetsa Magoda, who is going to just take you at a high level through the workforce guidance publication, and then our other colleague, Christina, will join to talk a little bit more about the database. Over to you, Nyawa.
Thanks, Lauren. I hope I'm audible enough. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nyawasetsa Magoda, and I will be taking you through an overview of our first publication titled The Hydrogen Skills Needs Assessment and the Workforce Estimation Document. So the work was done to help better understand, prepare, and manage the human capital requirements of hydrogen economies. The publication and the associated hydrogen skills database, which will be presented later on, have been developed to support stakeholders in commissioning, designing and delivering, and also interpreting hydrogen skills needs assessment and workforce estimation studies from multiple countries. By sharing international case studies and methodological insights, it aims to enable and also streamline workforces planning and at a country level and identify methodological needs and knowledge gaps that exist that could be addressed through international research, development and collaboration to strengthen hydrogen workforce development efforts on a global scale. The examples and insights presented in these publications have been developed from a survey of IPHE member countries. It's complemented also by some desktop research that have been conducted and also engagements with a number of different authors from the skills needs assessment and workforce estimation studies that have been conducted. And just to give a quick disclaimer, the document does not necessarily provide a comprehensive inventory of needs assessment and workforce estimation studies that have been done to date, but rather it provides examples from a diversity of contexts to illustrate different choices of methodologies and their benefits and also including their limitations. So, next slide. To give context and to answer the question why we do a hydrogen skills needs assessment and workforce estimation, firstly, it's to identify critical occupations and skills. Secondly, to forecast future workforce demand. Thirdly, to support education and training alignments. Fourthly, to enable strategic workforce planning and then also to support policy and funding decisions, and also to enable safe and efficient deployment of hydrogen. Next slide. So the approaches of conducting these studies vary depending on the context and also the objectives. But steps typically include the ones that are highlighted on the table, with literature and data reviews and also stakeholder engagements being an ongoing feature throughout these steps. The publication also describes each of these steps in more details and outlines the methodological choices within them made in different country studies to illustrate their implication for information and insights that can be generated. It also includes summaries of 18 skills needs assessments done by different countries across the globe. Next slide. Due to the interest of time, unfortunately, we won't be able to delve too much into the details of the methodology and its related steps today, but we encourage everyone here to read the report. And I would like now to just highlight some of the aspects that that can be considered. Firstly, in the scoping stage, it is important to map the hydrogen sector as it evolves in the region and not be tempted to include all possible value chains and job roles that might develop, drawing on comprehensive assessments that have been done for other countries or regions. The study will likely inform policy, training, and other interventions in a specific region. So it needs to reflect the realities of that specific region that we choose to focus on. With that said, it is important to only consider the core technical value chain, but also those in the supporting environment so that the conditions are set up for the deployment of hydrogen at the pace and the scale envisioned for a specific country or region. It is also important to consider not just the operational phase, but the stages that precede it and associated activities that enable the successful deployment of hydrogen. To give more sense into this, if you can see a diagram on the slide, it's an example of the multiple value chain stages and phases for a skills assessment study that was done by the British Columbia in Canada. And I think we are very fortunate today to have one of the authors of the study available in our panel today, Pat Hafnagel-Smith. So we'll get to get more info or insights about this later on. So next slide, please. The second chapter of this publication focuses on workforce estimation. As these studies are sometimes done independently when there is a specific reason for wanting to estimate the number of jobs associated with the hydrogen economy, workforce estimation studies enable governments, the industry, the educational institutions to align their policy and capacity building efforts with the demand of a growing and evolving hydrogen economy. By enabling an understanding of how workforce needs may vary under different development pathways, workforce estimation studies help to identify critical skills gap, anticipate training and educational requirements, and also guide investments into the workforce readiness. Two main approaches were identified for this study, those based on microeconomic models and those based on employment factors. Within these two classes, there are different methodologies that exist. Again, just to stress the point, the choice will depend on the objectives for doing the workforce assessment, and broadly speaking, whether there is interest in economy-wide effects or a more focused on the hydrogen sector itself. The specific selection of methodology may be informed by factors such as the technical complexity, the data availability, and also the need for a more analytical, depth. The workforce estimation chapter also focuses, also illustrates the different methodologies using case studies of workforce estimations done by different countries to highlight the main features, the advantages, and also the limitations that are associated with these specific studies. Some of these limitations are general to all workforce estimation studies. Others are more compounded by hydrogen due to it being a fast evolving multi-sector industry. And some countries may find it relatively difficult to they might find it difficult when the hydrogen sector is still emerging, and there might be some uncertainty on how the sector will evolve in the future and some data limitations that may exist. So for both the workforce estimation and the needs assessment study done, the intent was to, one, to assist those commissioning studies to reflect on what information is of interest and be better informed about the different methodologies available and their underlying assumptions and benefits and also limitations that may exist. Secondly, the intent was to assist those designing and delivering the studies by providing examples that can assist in methodological choices and the communication of the results as well. And lastly, it's to assist those interpreting the skills needs assessment to understand the inherent nature of these methodologies and the associated limitations. This will then enable them to interpret the results within the bounds of what is reasonable and also match their policy responses, training interventions, or any communication on workforce benefits of the sector accordingly. Next slide. Thank you. So the entire publication has chapters that are dedicated to insights, gaps, and challenges, and these were grouped into three different types. The first one is one that's dedicated to commissioning and delivering on skills needs assessments. The second one is more focused on methodological challenges, the gaps emerging from these needs skill assessments that have been conducted. And the last group of insights is just general insights on hydrogen skills and workforce estimation development emerging from the hydrogen skills assessment. So focusing on the first group of insights, which are focused on commissioning and delivering hydrogen skills needs assessment, the insight there is clear goal setting and scoping is very important to ensure skills needs assessments generate context specific insights that are more actionable. And also, early stakeholder involvement increases the likelihood of implementing recommendations very effectively. And also, reflecting the region or the country, the country's own situation is essential to enable the policy or the planning interventions to be more based on the findings of the skills needs assessments to be consistent with the actual nature, the pace, and the scale of the hydrogen sector development in the target region or the country, including roles in the enabling environment. So these might be your policy makers, your regulators, and also your financiers in the space. alongside the technical roles is very important to avoid any barriers to the development of the skills. To provide a true reflection of the status quo, the training pathways needs to cover both the accredited and also the non-accredited training pathways. The selection of the workforce estimation methodologies needs to be informed by the type of information needed. Either this is the economy-wide impact, or we are evaluating a more direct impact. The methodological and the data limitations and the assumptions needs to be clearly communicated in the studies. Careful interpretation and communication of the hydrogen workforce estimates, robust planning in response, and also periodic updating of the workforce estimates is more advisable. And also drawing on multidisciplinary expertise improves the efficiency and quality of the skills needs assessments. And also in addition, it enables the recommendations to be more targeted and more implementable. And lastly, adequate time and also budget needs to be made available in order to enable all of this. Next slide, please. Focusing on the next group of insights, these are more targeted towards the challenges and the gaps related to the hydrogen skills needs assessment. And in relation to firstly, we'll focus on the occupational classification frameworks. These present an issue because the current international, regional, and the national occupational classification frameworks do not fully capture the hydrogen-related roles, especially for renewable and low-carbon hydrogen pathways. This then highlights the need for relevant updates. Secondly, clarifying hydrogen job roles using the occupational classification frameworks enables a better linking of information on labor demand and training provision, and also it supports the workforce planning and the associated support training alignments and also regional coordination. The enabling hydrogen job roles to be need to be more fully included in the occupational classification systems, and this requires a definitive set of hydrogen related occupations. And the hydrogen database that has been developed can then serve as a useful starting point to carry this type of work. The second grouping is in relation to the training and the skills data. The gaps in this area are in identifying hydrogen-related training, which is very difficult because the content is often embedded in general qualifications and it's usually inconsistent, and the terminology used is inconsistent as well. The second point related to that is that developing standardized descriptions of hydrogen-related skill is essential to improve alignment and also communication on skills needs with industry and across the skills ecosystem as a whole. The third insights is related to the workforce estimation methodologies and what type of gaps and challenges we experienced in that aspect. The first one is that there is a need for better country-specific data to enable more context-specific workforce estimations, and for the methodologies and the data to enable hydrogen workforce estimations to better account for the industry's dynamics. The second one is the capacity building, and the clearer communication is needed to enable an understanding of the nature of the hydrogen workforce estimation methodologies and the applicability to specific goal at hand. This is very important to enable selection of appropriate methodologies, the critical analysis of the workforce estimation results, and also ultimately informed decision-making about the attendant nature, the scale, and the timing of interventions for the skills workforce development. Next slide. So this publication covered countries with well-developed hydrogen economies to ones with emerging hydrogen economies. Some general insights emerged from these studies, and before I cover these, it is important to note that the insights and actions would be specific to a particular region or a particular country, its goal, and also the scope of the work. These should not be considered as universal, as hence it's advisable to do a region-specific skills needs assessment to inform the region-specific interventions for the skills and workforce development. Some insights on the hydrogen and the workforce development that came out from the skills and needs assessment done include some insights on the occupational and on the occupations and the skills. These are the fact that there are no fundamentally new occupations unique to hydrogen, but some occupations and specific roles may be new to a particular country. The second one is whether new occupations are needed in a specific region or a country, usually depend on its existing foundation industries and the maturity of its hydrogen economy. The third one is there are the various degrees of augmentation of existing occupations related to hydrogen through hydrogen-specific skilling may be required for different hydrogen-specific roles. The second group of insights is related to training. So currently, the hydrogen training is led mainly by the industry, and this is in line with the emerging and developing nature of the industry. Where rapid growth is expected, embedding these hydrogen skills in a formal education system can enable the hydrogen skills developments to scale. Third, the last one is the flexible options like your micro credentials and your short courses can meet immediate needs and enable the transition of workers from other sectors and build the foundation for a more formal accredited training in time as the industry continues to grow. The last group of insights that we got is related to the development of the workforce. And in this case, many of the clean energy sectors draw from the same set of foundation qualifications and skills. On the one hand, this presents a challenge. So the hydrogen sector may now need to compete with other clean energy sectors for the same skills. But on the other hand, it can be considered as a benefit to those with relevant foundation skills or qualifications because it then allows them to pivot to where the demand is in the clean energy sector as time goes on. And lastly, the investment in building foundation skills is thus a robust strategy to support workforce developments for hydrogen and other clean energy sectors. Next, please. And just to close it off and reinforce the point that the document does not necessarily provide a detailed analysis and comparison of specific hydrogen occupations, jobs, and skill sets, as might be undertaken to develop a reference list of occupations or hydrogen-specific skills. Such an exercise is one that requires a multidisciplinary expertise and collaborations between skills experts, the industry, and also representatives and educators in the space. It is the intent of the database of the job roles and the skills that has been developed alongside the document to serve as an input to such an endeavor. And with that said, I would like now to hand over to my colleague Christina, who will take you through the database.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Noah. Yes, on to our second deliverable that we're launching today, which is accompanying our guidance document. We are launching an interactive job role database, which is online on the IPHE website, which is essentially a database of hydrogen-associated job roles and their descriptions. This database draws on the wealth of knowledge that already exists in published skills needs assessments, which can be useful to a wide range of stakeholders in the hydrogen workforce space. This includes government officials, those involved with workforce planning, as well as organizations working in training, accreditation, and certification. The problem is that the information in these studies is often difficult to find since it's spread across multiple reports and also described in different ways across different reports. The idea was that by centralizing this information and sorting it according to the characteristics of specific roles, that the database would allow for easy comparison and analysis of the job requirements associated with these roles. This ideally would enable new entrants to the hydrogen economy to quickly identify skills and workforce needs. And it also provides them with a way of checking for consistency and equivalence between different data sets. And this can ultimately support verification and highlight opportunities for standardization in the hydrogen workforce. Over the longer term, the database aims to provide a strong foundation for developing a potentially exhaustive or definitive data set of roles and occupations, as well as hydrogen-related skills and competencies. And this will essentially be needed to support hydrogen economies as they grow around the world. The database is based on published workforce and skills assessments from a number of countries. As Nyawa mentioned, there's about 18 studies that we described in the guidance document. 7 of these were chosen to be implemented in the database. And this is just due to the fact that the studies that we chose to implement map the roles quite well onto a value chain that we could use for consistency, and also provided a lot of role-specific information in the reports. So the data sets that are currently included are those from Australia, Canada, France, from which we have 2 data sets from 2 different skills needs assessments, India, Namibia, and South Africa. Each of these studies had different methodologies and a different level of detail, but all were reviewed, and their job roles and skills information were extracted to form the data sets of the work. And the database is also designed to be readily updatable. So should a new skills needs assessment be published, it can easily be added and shared with the users. We also invite all of the attendees today who are interested in learning more about these studies, if they haven't written them themselves, to explore the database webpage, which has a document that summarizes the studies and also provides links to all of our resources. So we invite them to look at that. And we should also probably note that there are several published skills needs assessments, as I mentioned, that were not incorporated into the database. And these also have a lot of value, but it was just due to the fact that the way that roles were described was not necessarily in a way that we could easily put into this database format, hence why we didn't use all of the available reports for this. Looking at how we actually transform the data, the information in the job roles in the different reports was not always consistent. In many of the assessments, the job descriptions were scattered across the report in different figures and chapters. And they also described things in different ways, so there was very little commonality between data sets. And this kind of prevented us from having a data structure where it could be job role, qualification, value chain stage, just due to the fact that they all approached it quite differently. So to work around this while still keeping the richness and the richness of information that we saw in the reports, we came onto the data structure that we have now. And that this is where all of the information for a given job role was put into one data field. As you can see on the bottom right-hand corner there, that is how it looks. And then it is linked to the job title, and then we went and assigned individual characteristics across a wide field to the specific data to make it more filterable and searchable. And this process created a standardized entry for each role, which linked it to its qualification skills and other chosen descriptors. So what the result was our current database. It has 7 data sets, as I mentioned, and a total of 693 roles and descriptions. These are all classified according to their associated value chain stage, their qualification type, their role title, key activities, focus areas, and the data contained within the data set. And it is also searchable according to keywords and wildcards. And as I said, the intention is to update this as new studies are published, as it will be a living resource. And for those that are interested, there is an option to download this or to access it in Excel format if you're interested in doing deeper analysis, and that would just be done by emailing the Secretariat. So there's 2 interactive tools on the IPHE's website, you'll see. The first of which allows users to filter and search according to the characteristics that they're interested in. You can see on the example here this user has used the tool to filter only for roles that are associated with hydrogen power generation in the value chain stage, and also those that require a non-STEM related bachelor's degree. So this would be roles that meet both of these criteria, not one or the other. And the results then you can see can be collapsed or expanded according to the source country or according to the job title. You can dig in and find more information that way. But there's other ways or other classifications or characteristics you can filter on. As I mentioned before, role title is an option. You can also look according to the key activities associated with the role, and this would be the core responsibilities and functions of that role for a given value chain stage activity. There's also the option to look at focus area, which is a more general filter in terms of the general discipline of a given role. You can filter for the data contained in the bio of the role that you're looking for. If you're looking for studies that speak about skills gaps or just general skills, you can filter for that, for example. And ultimately, you can also use the keyword search that searches both the role title and the description for keywords, either just a simple keyword search or wildcard if you are interested. And the second part of the database is more of a high-level mapping of the different roles and where they occur in different data sets. And this provides an idea of where a user might be able to find a specific role. It also gives you a look at how the roles occurred across different studies. This makes it easier to maybe compare different data sets side by side, but it also highlights which roles come up most frequently in the studies that we incorporated. However, it's worth noting that the scope of the skills needs assessments really did vary. And there also wasn't a standardized role title. So repeating role titles and role titles that only occur once would require more of a detailed analysis if you would like a better idea of what occurs where due to the lack of standardization between standardization and consistency between the different data sets. So that's the second page of the tool. Accompanying the tool, we also have some associated resources. We've prepared a user guide that provides step-by-step instructions on how to navigate and use the tool, as well as troubleshooting advice and a list of FAQs. It also includes details on how to give feedback or how to request the Excel-based database. You should want that. In addition, we've also have a couple of other resources linked on the page. You'll be able to look at the source references and summaries of them. And we've also linked our guidance document on that page. You could see examples of the resources on the slide here if you're curious. To conclude on both Nyawa's and my presentations, these deliverables are not static. They will continue to be updated as new data sets and insights become available to try and keep them as relevant and useful as possible. And we really do encourage all of the attendees and stakeholders here today to actively explore and make use of the tools, both the database and the guidance document, as these resources, as well as our two upcoming publications, are all designed to be a living resource, and it will grow in value as it's used. The key goal here is to try and catalyze dialogue between industry, education, and government, as well as training institutions. By bringing these groups together, we can try and ensure that these insights actually become action. We also want to support the development of a more comprehensive job and skill inventory. You can see there is a requirement for that. And these are really critical for workforce planning. And finally, our aim is really to strengthen alignment across all actors, so that the right skills are being developed to meet the hydrogen sector's needs, as well as those of the future. And for any questions on the deliverables we presented today, I invite the attendees to use the Q&A function, and we will go through the questions after the panel. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christina and Nyawa. And I realize for the audience that's a blast of information. And really, we've given you the links to the database as well as to the document. And they're all available on the IPHE website. And really for us, this is not about actually, putting a set of documents out there and putting a database out there and saying our job is done. For us, this is truly the start of a conversation with a wider group. So we really encourage you to look at it, make suggestions, tell us where you've struggled with information, tell us where you've disagreed. We really want to collectively help countries and the wider hydrogen economy globally to develop as well and as efficiently as possible. Great, so there's been a blast of information, and I'm thinking as you start thinking about it, hopefully you do have questions. There is the Q&A function. But we are really honored today to have the panel that we do. We've asked a mix of people to join us today to share some of their insights and their experience with you live and to be available to you, to ask particular questions. We have tried in the document to capture some of the craft skills, the things that sit in people's heads that you will never read in a document. And I think that's very much the spirit in which we've put together this panel. Is we have a range of experts, and I'm going to introduce them now, but we looked at, given our focus is on commissioning, delivering, and interpreting skills needs assessment, and this is a largely methodological focus, is to look at a mix of people who have commissioned studies, a mix of people who've done them in different contexts, people who've tried to develop tools to support things, and also a representative from industry who can tell us a little bit about how we can improve the dialogue with industry to really enhance our understanding of skills needs. So roughly in order of countries, alphabetically, as Nyawa pointed out, we do feature both the Canadian studies that Pat Hoefnagel-Smith has developed. One is actually the data is in the database, which is the federal level one, but we've also summarized and extracted some examples from the specific study that Pat did for British Columbia. Franklin is my co-lead on the task force. Franklin is actually embedded in industry. He runs the Hydrogen School in Costa Rica. The Hydrogen School will be well featured in our next publication on training. And also, just by the by, the front cover of our publication is actually a photo of trainees at the Hydrogen School in Costa Rica. So we're very pleased to have Franklin with his depth of experience in the hydrogen industry in a variety of applications and his hands-on experience in building up a comprehensive hydrogen school and training trainees. Twanelo is a co-South African. Twanelo is with our Council for Scientific Industrial Research. And Twanelo, together with one of our other task force members who was at the CSR at the time, were responsible for the South African skills needs assessment. And I'm hoping to tease out a few of the differences between what you would do in a country that is data rich and has a well-established hydrogen economy to one in like we have in South Africa, which does have a hydrogen economy, fossil-based, but probably less well-resourced in terms of the data available to us to do these studies. Gaston has joined us from Uruguay. We're waiting with bated breath for the skills needs assessment and workforce estimation that's being done for Uruguay. So Gaston is really able to help share this from the perspective of a commissioner who can tell us a little bit more about why they commission things. And then finally, I mentioned that UNIDO and the IPHE and UNIDO have an agreement to try and work together where we can. Smita and her team will be launching their skills needs assessment tool in the next while. So we thought this is an excellent opportunity to also just hear a little bit more about that. So without further ado, that's our panelists. And really, we're going to try our best to share tips and tricks across this geographically dispersed and diverse expert team. So without further ado, I'm going to probably start at the idea of commissioning. And I thought maybe Gaston, as I mentioned to everybody, you've recently commissioned a study. Could you tell us a little bit about the motivation for that, as well as your expectations of that study?
Of course. Hello, everyone. I introduce myself as Lauren said. My name is Gaston Ellis. I'm from Uruguay. I work at the Ministry of Industry, Energy and Mining, and I'm a chemical engineer. So in order to explain a little bit the motivations behind the studies that we've recently done, I wanted to give you a little bit of context about Huawei. Huawei has successfully achieved its first energy transition, producing over 90% of its electricity from renewable sources, such as hydroelectric, photovoltaic, wind, and biomass. So to take the next step into the decarbonization, we consider different possibilities, one of which was the production of green hydrogen. Green hydrogen, just to tell the concept, produced by electrolysis. And around 2022, we published our green hydrogen and derivatives roadmap, which shows Uruguay's potential to produce green hydrogen and its derivatives such as methanol and jet fuel, to give you an example. So what we are currently doing at the ministry, it's basically we have to show or demonstrate the positive impacts of what these projects will bring. So we have started working on how much employment will this industry will generate and what skills will be needed. And we started doing that because we believe our roadmap is currently lacking this information. So in order to proceed with this, two studies, one dedicated to skill needs assessment, and the other was to estimate workforce based on specific scenarios based on the green hydrogen roadmap. So basically, just to give what these studies were about, one was to tell us what kind of job roles we need for these projects, and the other one was, okay, how much people will be needed. But that's not all. We are currently working on a study that will show the gaps between our education system and what we currently basically what we currently have and what we need to produce these job roles, and also the amount of people needed. So those I believe were the main motivations. But what we expect from this practice, well, basically to learn what we are currently lacking in this subject in order to start working on. And also I think it's a great exercise to start working together with the academy or the education centers and the industry together in order to make some sort of roadmap regarding this topic, because it's really necessary to have both all the opinions to generate this kind of strategy, a long-term strategy. And I think that answers the question.
And thank you so much, Gaston. And I didn't pay him to say all of that, but I would hope that you got a very good sense of some of the links and the steps that Nyawa initially mentioned, and the kind of commonalities, and I think particularly that reasoning, having hydrogen having to show what its benefits are. I think that was a really particularly good point, Gaston.
Yes. Really, since I joined the task force, I realized that we've been doing similar thinking, which was really reassuring, really.
Excellent. Thank you, Gaston. I'm now going to hand over to Pat. And of all the data sets that we have in the database, the most comprehensive by far in terms of number of roles is the Canadian one. And I think together with Australia, I think Australia and Canada published in the same year. Those were some of the right original skills needs mapping. So it really is an honor to have you here, Pat, to tell us more about it. And I'm really just keen for you to give us the context to both studies, if you'd like. Who commissioned them? What was the motivation for those? And maybe, how did you approach it methodologically? What were the easy elements? And what did you find as challenges, even, at the time, given that you were some of the pioneers and some of the still leaders in the space?
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here, and it's very exciting to see what you've done to pull all these studies together and provide a very usable tool for others to use. So yes, I was the primary author of the national study looking at the skills required to advance Canada's hydrogen economy. That particular study was commissioned by an organization called the Transition Accelerator. And their purpose is to really look at what does it take to accelerate energy transition across Canada. And so for them, a lot of their work had been very focused on the technical aspects required for energy transition. And so they brought me in to help look at the workforce piece. And I believe I was chosen for that work because I have been doing skills assessment in the energy space for about 25 years. And so it was kind of a natural extension for me to look at some of the emerging energy sources, energy carriers, and that kind of stuff from a energy ecosystem perspective. And so they actually, it was identified that really sort of identifying your scope is so important. And so that was certainly one of the first exercises is, kind of defining what are we going to do in terms of where the different components of the value chain that we needed to identify the core occupations required for. And so I was lucky in that the Transition Accelerator had already done a lot of that work in terms of identifying the hydrogen economy for Canada. I think what is kind of maybe unique about Canada is that some of you may know we are a very large country. And so there's different strengths and challenges and potential end uses across the country in terms of what might be the production pathways, but also what might be some of the most reasonable end uses. And so we had a pretty broad scope in terms of looking at a number of production pathways, not because in some cases, we have access to renewable energy, and that makes sense that our hydrogen will be, electrolyzer based. And then in some cases, we also have an abundance of natural gas. And so that makes sense that our hydrogen would be produced using natural gas. But of course, with the vision of becoming more low carbon, we would need to partner or that natural gas production or other sort of fossil fuel production with carbon capture and storage. So really looking at sort of that whole, it was a fairly large scope. And so, that's what we went with the first study in 2022. And we made a decision, I would say also in terms of in that scoping, not to focus on the workforce required to produce the feedstock, whether that be renewable energy or fossil fuel sources, just because there were other organizations that had already defined the skills required there. So our focus was really on utilizing those feedstocks to produce hydrogen. So with the scope identified and the different components of the value chain, the production, the end use, and how we're going to connect production and end use, the process I took was to really identify what are the activities involved in each of those value chain components. My belief is it's the activities that are going to drive the kinds of occupations and skill sets that you need. So first having to decide, identify what those activities are. And then I looked at, what occupations already exist within the Canadian economy that carry out those activities in an industrial setting. So it really sort of provided that foundation of, what do we have already that we can leverage that are really carrying out, production activities, transportation activities, utilities, all those kinds of occupations already exist within the Canadian economy. And we are a pretty industrial country. And so, not only do we have a lot of those occupations, we have a lot of good information that identifies what are the skills and knowledge required for some of those occupations. So then the task was, then what are the unique skills and knowledge required to carry out those activities within the hydrogen industry? So it really became an exercise of understanding what do we need to bolt on or, expand in terms of, advancing the hydrogen industry, with those kind of specific skills and knowledge area in order to carry out those activities within the hydrogen economy. And then what was also identified was just, I then took a look at, what are the occupations, if the goal was to advance hydrogen, what are the occupations required to really address some of the other non-technical kinds of barriers that we might face in terms of advancing hydrogen? And so some of those barriers are related around creating confidence in hydrogen, building out demand for hydrogen as an end use energy carrier or energy source. And so that really drove some additional occupations like communications, professionals that will help in terms of educating, stakeholder relations. So building some stakeholder confidence in terms of using hydrogen, producing hydrogen, having hydrogen near your communities or, using hydrogen in your utilities. Really big for us here in Canada is engaging with our Indigenous communities and partners. So those Indigenous relations occupations really become very important in terms of trying to advance the use of hydrogen at the pace of change we are looking for. So that kind of built out the scope and the occupations, the core occupations that we looked at. In the initial study, as was mentioned, I also did a study for British Columbia, which here in Canada, that's a specific province. And so we could really leverage that work. And for the BC work, we looked at what's changed from 2022 when that initial study was done to 2024. And there had been some changes. There had been some production pathways that were coming more feasible. So specifically methane pyrolysis. So that was added to the value chain, as well as hydrogen production as a byproduct of another process. So collecting hydrogen that might have been released or not used in another process as a source of hydrogen for end uses. So those were added to the scope, as well as, looking at the construction side of things, because, I think even in the work that you've done, you identify, even though construction is, it supports the hydrogen economy if you need to build out infrastructure. And here in Canada, we're already really tight labor market for construction. So we thought it was really important to add that as a precursor to advancing a hydrogen economy. So those were, that was sort of the approach and the methodology. Lauren, you asked about, some challenges, and I would say one would be, even though we do have have a hydrogen economy here, in that we produce hydrogen for different industrial processes. There still was not a really robust employment or industry base to to start talking to people and interviewing people and asking them what are the occupations or skill sets they need. So we really went and first defined and mapped out what we felt the occupations were and the skills and knowledge required. And then we went to industry and validated it and upgraded it. We found that industry was in a better position to react and help us improve what we had mapped out, as opposed to starting with, tell us what what are your occupations, what are your skill sets. It was just much more efficient. And then I think the other thing that was just so helpful in doing this, and it came from the Transition Accelerator, is this mindset of, this is going to be a starting point. Let's define something that others can use and improve upon. It didn't have to be perfect to start out with. And that has been just very helpful, because I know sometimes, as researchers, we want to get it perfect, but, just given the emerging nature of this work, we needed a sort of springboard in order to do this work. So that was very helpful to have that mindset in terms of taking this work on.
So many insights there, Pat, thank you. And so many echoes, fascinating. We don't unfortunately have somebody today that's going to be able to talk much about workforce estimation, but that when you look at those macroeconomic approaches to workforce estimation, it really is about understanding the knock-on effects in the economy, and you starting to pick up on that construction side is really important. And I think we'll definitely find that echoed often. And we really hope that the IPHE, the work that we've done in the task force, really start getting that industry engagement. We really, and I'm going to ask Franklin at the end to touch a bit on that, but really to be able to ground truth what we're doing. And again, you also mentioned how fast moving it was, that literally within the 2 years gap between your two studies, you were adding new technologies. And I know particularly the Indian study that we featured, they've actually subsequently published an update, which we'll include over time. They actually also had to look at it in terms of technology readiness and kind of think, well, actually, for some of the places where, and what role we'll be playing in the technology, do we need more of the kind of R&D type of skills? And then for those things that were more, established and we're going to just import the technology, we literally need to be operating it. So there's so many layers and complexity to it. So thank you, Pat. That's a great start. Tuanella, I'm going to hand over to you, because you've also done one of the earlier skills needs assessments in the South African context. You had a few other studies to kind of start drawing inspiration from, but a particularly different context in South Africa, whereas South Africa, we have a very well-established fossil hydrogen sector, but the low carbon and renewable hydrogen, electrolytic hydrogen sector is still very new to us. Do you want to share some thoughts again, methodologically? How did you approach it? And in a situation where you've got an emerging economy, are there particularly good methodological decisions you made that helped you? And are there maybe a few things that you might do differently, say, if you could do it again?
Yeah, no, thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon to everyone that's made time to participate in today's webinar. As Lauren's indicated, our low carbon hydrogen economy is still in its nascent stages. And so in going about our skills needs assessment, our team adopted a comprehensive, what we'd like to think is a flexible methodology that's allowed us to identify potential skills needs without being limited by our current data constraints nor the nascency of the industry in the country. The work that we did was work that was commissioned by the Department of Higher Education and Training as part of their labor market intelligence program. And as a starting point, we benchmarked against countries which had already conducted quite detailed skills needs assessments. And several of those also happened to be members of the IPHE, like Australia, Canada, and France. And I think this comparative analysis provided us with really valuable insights into understanding the range of occupations and hydrogen-related capabilities that might be relevant for the South African context. And then secondly, recognizing that the industry is still emerging, we deliberately chose a very broad, inclusive approach. Instead of focusing narrowly on specific segments, we cast the net quite wide to identify occupations across the full value chain, from production, storage, distribution, including the end-use applications. And because of this data gap, we had to engage a diverse range of stakeholders within the South African skills ecosystem, including some industry players, academia, training institutions, the government, departments, to gather local perspectives on what skills they understood would be needed in future. And these stakeholder engagements were really crucial for capturing the context-specific needs and for identifying capabilities that may need to be incorporated into university curricula, what's being offered in our TVET colleges and the occupational qualifications offering, including any reskilling and upskilling interventions for the folks that are currently participating in our fossil fuel-based hydrogen economy. The main challenge that we encountered, which you spoke to, was the limited availability of direct local data and the nascent state of the industry-specific skills development frameworks. And to address these, some of the key methodological decisions that proved quite helpful in our process, which I mentioned in the beginning, was benchmarking. This provided a foundation of knowledge and best practice that we could adopt locally. It also helped us to identify relevant occupations and skills that could be relevant in our environment. And then that stakeholder engagement component across the energy and skills ecosystem, this really helped to ensure that we gathered the diverse insights and also to just validate our preliminary findings from the review of literature and the skills needs assessment that had been completed by our sister countries in the IPHE. And then I think lastly, choosing to adopt a sort of holistic value chain approach. This has, I think, prevented us in limiting ourselves as a country to just one segment of the value chain. And this gives us sort of flexibility to be able to plan for a variety of future scenarios, given the nascency of the industry in the country. And so in quote unquote, our data poor environment, those strategies, particularly the benchmarking and the stakeholder consultations, were quite vital. They enabled us to sort of develop what we think is a forward-looking skills needs assessment. And then our ongoing task, though, is going to include the need to improve data collection and monitoring. But the approach that we used, I think, has given us a sort of a strong foundation that we can, as a country, build on.
That's great, Twanelo. And I think that message is coming through from everyone, is kind of just get something down, because this is a fast-moving industry, and be willing to update it. And I think that's particularly important for things like workforce estimation, where the tools inherently are static and linear. And, we take a best guess, but then we're also quite responsible about how we communicate it, so that we don't kind of over-communicate what the value that this industry can bring, but very much put a defensible and well-argued and evidence-based argument forward for what benefits and jobs and skills it will bring. So great, there's some really great kind of craft skills coming through from there. I'm going to swap over to Smita now, and really, UNIDO has developed a tool. So far we've had, experts doing it, and I think I've kind of watched the UNIDO tool from the sidelines, both for its comprehensiveness, but also for its strong focus on, I think, the developing country context. So Smita, if you can give us some context to why did you do the tool, how have you developed it, where are you applying it, and just really any thoughts from yourself at the moment from a methodological point of view that you feel can add to the discussion we're having here.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for having us. So I'm Smita Fokia from the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. We have launched the global program for hydrogen in industry in 2021, specifically to try and accelerate the hydrogen industry globally. So within that, we realized indeed, like many of your speakers mentioned today, that there is a big need for, it's a new industry, governments don't know which skills would be needed, how many people would need to work in that industry. So we thought we'd try and help out in this workforce estimation that can be done. So we developed the skills gap assessment methodology for the hydrogen sector together with the Center for Sustainable Hydrogen Transformation in SOAS at University of London. So the methodology itself, it builds on Hydrogen Europe's methodology, but which that one had a more of a focus on OECD countries, and we tried, as you said, to focus more on the emerging markets and developing economies. I think the main difference is that the workforce classification that's used, the standard classification that is used is slightly different, and we try to bring them together on the same level. So purpose of that methodology that we developed was mostly to identify and assess skills gaps for the clean hydrogen sector, and how we went about it was very similar to what we've been hearing. We looked at the demand side. So in terms of industrial activities, we mapped all the relevant industrial activities along the whole hydrogen value chain. And we also looked at the technical job profile. So we defined what key occupations and what the required skills would be using those international standards that I mentioned before. And then we map the required skills onto those occupational tasks. Then, so that's on the demand side. On the supply side, we looked at educational programs. We assessed the output in terms of graduate numbers, program content, and also alignment. And having those two, we then did the gap analysis, identified any mismatches in terms of gaps, deficits, surpluses as well sometimes, in order to inform targeted intervention and workforce estimation. So in terms of implementation, how do we go about putting this in place? It's very much based on stakeholder engagement. So lots of workshops with all different stakeholders, government, industry, and education partners. We do a lot of data collection and analysis. So surveys from the industry, from the education sector, workforce mapping, then the analysis is done, that gap assessment is done, and afterwards we get we develop recommendations for the strategic plan in order to bridge the skills gap. So when we developed the methodology, we also tested it in a couple of countries, Egypt and Tunisia. So I give you the example of Egypt. As we all know, Egypt is a major hydrogen consumer, especially going towards the fertilizer industry. It has an ambitious green hydrogen strategy, trying to produce 1.5 million tons by 2030. So we looked at the demand side and the supply side of their workforce for hydrogen, and in terms of policy that came out, policy actions that came out from our study, it was to strengthen technical education and industry partnerships. Those two really need to speak a lot and go hand in hand when it comes to developing skills. To also support workforce scaling, especially in the medium-sized firms, because I think those ones are the ones that are least. There's a lot of medium-sized firms, but not as able as the larger size firms to upgrade, retrain their workers. And then finally, there's a need to promote gender equality, and ways to do that. Scholarships, internships, visibility campaigns, and so on. But I think in general, the methodology, what it does, it provides a replicable and evidence-based approach to skills gap assessment, something that you've mentioned as well before, just to ensure that whatever hydrogen strategies you do, that it's underpinned by robust workforce planning. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Smita. And I think you said that tool of yours is being launched quite soon.
Very soon. It's currently, the report is undergoing layouting, so the next month, yes.
That's wonderful, because we have 4 or 5 lines just in anticipation and in the report. So I'm really glad for the audience that they know that that's imminent. And it was so nice to hear you talk about demand side and supply side. And that's a great segue into Franklin, because Franklin is really both on the demand side and the supply side. We're going to be focusing a bit more on the supply side in terms of training at our next webinar that comes with our second publication. So Franklin, I think my question for you may be, we've mentioned again stakeholder engagement, mentioned again the importance of looking at things from an industry perspective. And I'd really like you to put your industry hat on and tell us a little bit about, how you would advise people wanting to identify skills to engage with industry. How can we as people who might be doing those skills assessment get the conversation so that we can get the information from the industry directly about their needs, but at the level of detail that helps us then to share with other stakeholders in the system, so that they can have tailored interventions that aren't, just supply focused interventions, but much more demand-led interventions. So I'd really value if you can share some industry perspectives.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Yes, in our case, I have to give you first a little bit of the context of Costa Rica. Costa Rica, is a very small country, is 50,000 square kilometers, about the size, maybe half of Ireland, if you can, imagine. It's 5 million people. It is a country that in some ways has been blessed with very good natural resources in terms of energy, for renewable energy. We have a mountain range that goes north to south, dotted with a lot of volcanoes. So we have hydroelectric power, and we also have geothermal power as well. And we got plenty of water, we got plenty of sun, we got plenty of wind. And so, as a result of that, since really the 1800s, Costa Rica has been electrifying the energy matrix. And today, I can say that at least the electricity part of the country is 99% renewable. So we don't have any natural gas, we don't have any oil. So hydrogen for us is green hydrogen only. That's the only option that we have. And the other problem in Costa Rica is that, you know, while the electric grid is very clean, is in renewable, and it does penetrate throughout the whole country. So it's a very well designed grid. The transportation is not clean. Is based on fossil fuels, which we do not have. So we have to import everything. So our company began to move into hydrogen in 2011. We started a small pilot project, and the project has grown over the years. We've been doing hydrogen for now, I guess, 14 years. And what we found is that we did not have the trained workforce that we needed. And so we were forced to do it ourselves, to train our own workers. And, you know, we've been rather successful at that. But recently we created the Hydrogen School. I think you've mentioned it a couple of times. It has been a very successful initiative. Is small. We only, train maybe at the most three students a cycle. Each cycle is about 5 to 6 months. And our approach to doing this training is very similar to learning to fly. I think I've mentioned this in a couple of occasions. You know, it's learning to fly an airplane. You have to fly, you have to get on an airplane, you have to go and take off, and you have to fly the airplane and you have to land it. And if you don't do it right, it can kill you. You know, this is technology, just like hydrogen, is very unforgiving, and you have to do it right, and you have to do it hands-on. There's no option to do theoretical training. It has to be practical. So these are basically our experiences have been that you don't need to have engineers or physicists or chemists to implement the hydrogen economy. You can just train technicians to give them the right information, the right tools, and it's just like flying an airplane. You don't need to be an aerodynamic engineer or an aerodynamicist to fly an airplane. You learn to fly because there are some procedures that you have to follow, and safety is paramount. So that has been our experience. We also are looking at hydrogen mostly for transportation at the moment. So our interest is not only the production of the hydrogen, but also the use of the hydrogen in vehicles. And so a lot of our training is geared towards electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles. We have a fleet of 14 fuel cell electric buses, and we have just a few cars, 4 little Toyota Mirais that are running around in the northwest of the country. And we're in the process of acquiring some trucks for long haul, heavy duty transportation using hydrogen. So that's the situational awareness in Costa Rica. And I really think that every country basically has to develop their own configuration for training that fits their need. And the private sector is a key player in making sure that that's done correctly, so that it meets the needs of the market.
Great, Franklin. You've really echoed for us in terms of tailoring, and I think right at the start with Nyawa, we very much had that comment about it having to be absolutely tailored to how the hydrogen economy will develop in the particular country. And I think also very much looking at having the right type of training for your needs, and then to be able to have mechanisms to scale that. I think that really emphasizes that. I think for the panelists, I'd like to throw a little bit of a surprise on you, and also for our background team. What I'm thinking is that it might be worth that we take a few of the questions that we've got in the Q&A first, and then just after the Q&A do a bit of a roundup on final thoughts, rather than do the final thoughts now and then try to address the questions. Because we've not had that many questions on the task force outputs, granted that people will hopefully then have them when they've had a chance to read them. So I'm going to start with the first question we received, and I think we're going to do this as a bit of a split question. Right, excellent. We have 5 questions, and I think we'll address them, and then, as I say, we'll do a wraparound where you can add some kind of closing remarks. So first of all, we've had a question from Nomfundo Zondi, and the question is, because Nomfundo is the skills coordinator for Impact Hydrogen, and she specifically got some questions on the South African hydrogen skills needsment, where she said there was a mention of misalignment as part of the barriers to skills. So Twanelo, I'm going to ask you to elaborate a little bit on that misalignment, but she also has a second question, which is really about how do we improve access and the success kind of cases of train the trainer type of situations. So what I'm going to suggest, Nomfundo, our second publication definitely will be looking at various train the trainer initiatives across the world. So I'm going to ask you to be patient with us. And it's also like a bit sneaky from my side to make it interesting for you to read our second publication as well as come to our second webinar, which is in a month's time. And there we're really going to focus on the train the trainer recommendations. And then our third webinar, to see how sneaky I am, that's the one that specifically focuses on access. So I'm going to ask you to be patient. Twanelo will answer one question. Our second webinar will hopefully answer the train the trainer. And our third webinar in January next year is really going to look at how innovative countries have been all over the world to enable access. And I'm also just going to briefly point to Franklin there. I think some of the comments Franklin made about not necessarily needing, tertiary qualifications. If you train people in an operational sense, to be trained to be really disciplined and, as Franklin put it, fighting, we can actually also use that as an enabler to bring in people. And Franklin's team are typically people who are school leavers. But we're going to focus on that in future webinars. So after that very long time, hopefully I've given you time to think, Twanelo. Would you mind elaborating a little bit for Nomfundo on what you meant with misalignment and, just give her some more insight there?
Yeah, so I think, Nomfundo, you are correct. We did highlight that issue of misalignment in the study, and in not unique to hydrogen, we were just raising it as something to avoid in this nascent industry. We still have an opportunity to try and mitigate against that misalignment. Otherwise, we risk training young people into unemployment, as we've often seen, not just in this industry, but in others. So in order to improve skills access, we would definitely need to enhance coordination amongst various stakeholders that are in the industry, and that would include industry itself, government, academia, as well as training institutions, to ensure that training programs are actually aligned with industry needs. This would include developing localized industry-specific curricula, and then expanding those entry points, such as your vocational training, apprenticeships, to make skills development more accessible to the broader population. Lauren has already given you a teaser for the next webinar that we're going to have, but in terms of success cases, I'm not sure if we can really claim what's already been done in South Africa as a success yet, because the graduation ceremony for the trainers that were trained was only in May, June of this year. But it is one of the promising approaches for a train-the-trainer model that's being implemented in the country. And it's an intervention that's being led by the Energy and Water Sector Skills Authority, what we term EWCTA in South Africa. It is a government entity that is really taking, I think, a lead in building that talent pipeline. And they partnered, to my first point around coordination, they partnered with Sasol, which is the company that's currently leading the production of fossil fuel-based hydrogen in the country. And it also included partnering with an Italian NGO, Race for Africa, and then industry players like Enel, and the delivery of the program for the lecturers from the TVET colleges was delivered by the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Pretoria. And so I think this type of an initiative sort of demonstrates the broader national effort to build a capable, future-focused workforce that can support our transition. But like I said, I think it might be early to claim success, given that the graduates only graduated about 4 months ago.
Great, thank you, Tuanelo. And Nomfundo, I hope that addresses at least your first question, and that we've tempted you into following the series. So hopefully when that kind of end screen comes up, you're going to click next episode and follow us a little bit like a binge television watcher. Great. The next question is actually one that I may be going to just take. And the question came in, does our guidance document recommend a single preferred methodology, or does it outline a menu of options depending on context? And then can the guidance be applied at a regional or a sectoral level, or is it designed mainly for national studies? I think here, when you get a chance, for the person who's asked this question, when you get a chance to look at the guidance document, the way we've approached it is, skills needs assessments are well established, but as applied to hydrogen, because as I say, it's an evolving, and you've heard from today that new technologies get developed, new insights are coming through all the time. What we've really tried to do is, if you start with a blank page when you're doing a skills needs assessment, even as somebody commissioning it, you don't necessarily know what's out there. And what we've been able to do, and when you look at the document, is more illustrate, when you say doing scoping, here's all the things you need to consider. When you say doing a gap analysis, here are the things you need to consider. And we've actually illustrated it with pictures that we've extracted that are the outputs of these various skills and needs assessments. And our hope is that somebody will look at it and say, wow, that is the kind of information that I need to make decisions. So that when they commission the study, it's almost that they might not have thought, oh, I need to add a column on gaps. I need to add a column on what foundation skills I've had. So I think our guidance document is to be fair, possibly more an inspiration document, and something that it's almost that, that quadrant of the things you don't know that you don't know, and being able to just trying to show the wider scope of the kinds of information you can get out there. And then the second part of your question was, it really is one of the case studies we have is right through to a city level, and then we have, as Pat managed, something as wide as Canada, where you can have different kind of configurations in different geographies. So it's not that that the methodology is restricted. It's just that there are hints as to how you would apply it at different scales, whether it's at a local one, a regional one, national, or almost like multinational, which kind of you would have in the EU context. So I hope that answers that question. Smita, the next question is one for you, and I'm happy to say if any of the other panelists would like to weigh in on this one. From an international perspective, Smita, with your global program in hydrogen, are you seeing any big gaps in terms of kind of coordination for workforce development? Are you feeling that we as a global community are are working well together? Do you think there are ways in which maybe as a global community we can work together better?
Yes, thanks, Lauren. So I think indeed it's we're starting to have so many of those gap assessments that are being done, and the question is more now, what do we do with this? How do we get people up to the speed that they need to be? So it's really, do we have the right trainings? Do we have the right curricula for, should we start looking into curricula development? I think this would be the next step. And I'm also very keen to join the next webinar to learn more about what you have planned on there.
Great, thank you, Smita. And I think I tend to agree with you. And it's interesting that the next question that's in our queue is actually from somebody who says, are university curricula being updated? And to reflect hydrogen skills needs, especially in mechanical engineering. And again, I'll just just take that one maybe because we are very much looking at our next webinar at the kind of training side. But for Shiv, who asked this, what Nyawa indicated when she presented was that what we are seeing is at the moment, and Franklin very much highlighted that as well when he said we had to train our own people. Largely what we are seeing, and that is very much in an emerging sector, it's not uncommon, is that industry is training. With hydrogen, there are particular challenges, and particularly around safety, it would be quite important for people to be trained quite similarly, because in an emergency situation or in any other situation, we can't necessarily be arguing about approaches or design or assembling things to different standards. So we are keen in the hydrogen context to have a lot more alignment. And from that point of view, having not company-specific training, but having some more universal training is very much useful. What Australia has done and what Canada is doing and several other countries is, while this sector and our understanding of it is still developing, doing short courses that are top-up skills or kind of micro credentials is an excellent way of building, starting to build the bolt-on skills, the specialist skills in hydrogen that the normal occupational qualifications need to enhance them to prepare people for the sector. And somewhere in the audience earlier, I saw Ashley Roberts has joined us from the USA, and we're going to be featuring that H2Edge program of theirs at the next feature as well, where they really worked so that industry and academia co-teach, each to their strengths and their knowledge sets, to be able to start enhancing curriculum. But really, if we want to scale, we are going to have to bring hydrogen in when those economies are really in need of scale and there's opportunity for employment in vast numbers in the sector. We will be seeing kind of optional electives or hard kind of embedded in courses skills for hydrogen. As you may have experienced in some countries, I know I grew up in South Africa with a strong mining sector. Quite a lot of our chemical engineering curriculum was mining orientated, and in time with strong hydrogen economies, we expect that. But what I'd encourage you to do is, if you play with a database, it'll be really interesting if you focus specifically on mechanical engineering. You should be able to look at what each of those countries said. What did Canada suggest around mechanical engineering? Where do mechanical engineers play a role? Which stages of the value chain? Do they need different skills if they're in different stages of the value chain? Did Australia say something different? Did South Africa, did France say something different? And that's really what we're hoping people are going to get out of the tool. Someone like yourself who has a particular interest in mechanical engineering, to be able to use that as your entry point into the database and to play with it. And also to see that as a dialogue. If you say, actually, I disagree, I think we could be adding this, or actually don't think we have the right foundation in mechanical engineering, to start engaging us in that dialogue. Great. We have several other questions. But I'm going to suggest we have the questions, we have your details, and we can answer some of those questions offline to you. I'd really like to use our last bit of time to really leverage our panelists who have kindly agreed to talk with us today. And I'm just going to call you up relatively randomly, particularly those who didn't answer in the Q&A session. So Twanelo and Smita, you can breathe a little bit easier. We'll come to you at the end. And just to say, Gaston, off the top of your head, within this context of skills needs assessments and workforce estimation, are there any 2 or 3 insights that you've gained, tips, aha moments that you've had in this space that you think would be valuable to share with an international audience?
Well, maybe. Regarding while we were doing the studies, I highly recommend that both the people who made the study and the ones who are checking it and seeing the information, etc., have some sort of social formation, a sociologist and economist, because sometimes the engineers think that numbers can solve anything, but the reality that this is a topic that needs to be taken into consideration from the social point of view. It's we've seen the difference between our studies, that one had a more an engineer perspective, another had a social half and half, actually, an engineer and a social. And the other one, you can understand it a little bit more, and you can take more recommendations from it. So that's something that I think it's quite important. And also another tip for this topic in general is communication, maybe. While you're doing these kind of studies, you are working on the hydrogen topic itself. It's really important, as from the government side, to communicate with all the main actors that had something to do with this topic. For example, in this case, it will be our Ministry of Jobs, but also the people who are currently doing the projects. It's really important to have feedback from each one of them if you are thinking to make a study that eventually will evolve into a long-term strategy. So I think those will be my recommendations.
Sorry, I need to unmute myself. Thank you. Absolutely excellent. That was excellent and really good recommendations there. And we've tried to capture some of those kind of things in the kind of tips as well, things about having steering committees and things like that to get that feedback. Pat, I'm going to go over to you. Kind of last thoughts, 2 to 3 top tips that you think on this space.
Yeah, I'd really love to sort of piggyback on what Gaston said. Around sort of that social point of view, and in terms of doing skills assessment, because I think in lots of cases we are looking at, access and equitable access to training and then to hydrogen jobs. And I think what we tried to do in the report with British Columbia, because that was a key sort of interest of them as well, is, we can look at the occupations that are required, and we can try and sort of quantify what those occupations, are going to be needed. But what we found really important is, if we wanted equitable access, we had to then look at, based on the occupations we needed, even before we quantify it, what is currently barriers to equitable access to those foundational occupations? So, you know, again, here in Canada, there's, you know, we need engineers. Well, what's currently barriers for, you know, some of our underrepresented groups to go into engineering, or some of the trades or craft occupations? Because, and that was just so important, because if we don't, before we even quantify things, if we aren't addressing those barriers, we're not going to reach or address that equitable access, you know, goal, because we're just going to replicate the same thing over and over again. So that became, you know, for me, just a really insightful piece. And in the broader perspective of, you know, dealing with uncertainty of an emerging sector, you know, it was important around how do we start building out a more diverse talent pool that hydrogen can draw from. But then we also broadened it to that cleaner energy ecosystem, because it was, who else in the clean energy ecosystem is going to need some of these skill sets? And it really identified, how to create a future ready talent pool. And I loved what Twinella said is, we don't want to train people for unemployment. So how do we mitigate the risk associated with, you know, an emerging sector? And how do we train people so that regardless of, you know, whether hydrogen takes off or biomass-based fuels takes off, there are employment opportunities for, you know, especially those underrepresented talent pools. So it's so great to do the detailed, you know, work for the hydrogen industry, but then taking a step back and looking at the forest for the trees in terms of how are we really going to have positive impact on what we're trying to achieve here. So that's my latest learning.
Right. Thanks, Pat. And you know, that just so echoes with that thing about the foundation skills are in common. So it's a competition, as Nyawa pointed out, in the sense that we're going to be competing for those foundation professions, but it's also a real benefit, because if we train those strong foundation skills, they will find employment in any of the sectors at the pace at which they develop. Franklin, we are pressed for time. We're going to ask that you just comment a key insight from your side, and I know you have practical experience as well of where your graduates land up. So it's going to have to be about a 30-second, 1-minute view so that we can wrap up, Franklin.
Yeah, very, very quickly, just picking up on what Pat was talking about, what we've found is that it's not just the hydrogen, but you also in terms of green hydrogen, it's not just the hydrogen. You need to think about the oxygen as well. Every kilo of hydrogen produces 8 kilos of oxygen, and it's this very pure oxygen. And there is a lot of stuff that you can do with that. It's very cheap if you're paying for the hydrogen. And then the other one is the water that comes as a result of the use of hydrogen in power generation, for example. Very large quantities of pure water. So those are important elements of the whole hydrogen economy that we oftentimes don't talk about very much, but we have found them to be very important. And then the last thing is just the importance of the business end of the training, training people for the business. How can you make this economically sustainable? So, yeah.
So some really good insights there, Franklin. Thank you. Twanelo and Smeta, I'm just going to do you in sequence. Twanelo and then Smeta, just what do you think? You go home and think, I should have said that. That's a really important insight I should have said with this global audience.
I think I'd just like to emphasize that in environments where data may be limited and industries are still emerging, we really do need a flexible, collaborative, as well as a comparable approach. Those can really assist in providing valuable insights into the skills landscape by benchmarking against international best practice, which considers local context, especially through engaging with a broad range of stakeholders. and adopting sort of a holistic view of the entire value chain, I think we can develop a forward-looking skill strategy that prepares us for the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Tswanelo. And Smeta, over to you as we're wrapping up. Some
Thank
last
you.
thoughts.
So I would still come in from that government perspective and how we can use skills gap assessment. So I would say to engage early, very early in the process and as broadly as possible, bring everyone on board for consultation, to also prioritize alignment of education and the training with industry needs, right? Because we shouldn't forget that skills mismatches, if it does happen, is very costly. So making sure that we align education with industry needs to also ensure that if the hydrogen sector does not take off as we expected, how the industry should have a way to absorb people, but in what areas? So this is what we need to find out as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I wish I want to say I'm going to do the thank you for the panel, and then I'm going to pass over to my co-lead Franklin just to close out our webinar in a moment. But just to say thank you so much to the panel. I think we've had some really good insights shared. And I think it was lovely to see the echoes. And as I said, I think we've got a community here that are thinking about the same things, learning different things, and just to encourage everyone to keep speaking, to keep sharing insights, and for us to really then see how we can collaboratively remove barriers and help this hydrogen economy to serve us all, our economies and our people. So thank you for the panelists. It's been a really interesting panel session. And then finally, with a few minutes to spare, Franklin, I'm just going to ask you to close on behalf of our Skills Task Force as well as the IPHE.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, thank you all very much for your time. I'd like to also congratulate Anyawa and Christina for their presentation. It's very difficult to summarize and distill all this information that is in those two documents in such a very well put together presentation. So congratulations on that to both of you. And to my fellow panelists, thank you for the time that you took to be with us. This is very important. It has been a really interesting exchange of ideas, and there's a lot more to come. Clearly, we're just scratching the surface. And so stay tuned. There are more deliverables, more documents that will be coming forward as a result of the activities of the IPHE and the task force, the Skills Task Force. So on behalf of the IPHE and the Hydrogen Skills Task Force, thank you all for your participation, your time, especially those who had to get up early and those who are staying late in your night or early in your morning. So, and it'll be until the next time we meet. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for everything.